in terms of that kind of journey from investor uh, through to kind of consumer or merchant focus, it's one thing saying kind of global interoperability via single endpoint, but that means nothing to somebody in the market. So it's really kind of taking the company on that journey and understand what we need to evolve, and sometimes making the tough decisions around what we need to let go.
Hello again, and welcome back to Funnel Vision. We're going to be speaking again with leaders in the B2B marketing industry, and we're really excited to share some insights with all of you today. I'm Paula Mejia.
And I'm Sasha Belenki.
Let's get started.
So today we're excited to speak to two guests, Charlie Gilbert and Benn Moore from Volt. Charlie is the VP of Marketing Communications and Benn the VP of Product Marketing at Volt. Volt is building the global infrastructure for real-time payments. Scaling and enterprise businesses use it to accept real-time payments, initiate payouts, and manage funds. I should also add that Volt is considered one of the hottest fintech startups in the UK right now.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to hear more about how you create the magic that is content marketing, brand marketing, product marketing working together. Because I think we all know that that's the ideal, but how you actually make it happen is no guarantee. So before we jump into that, can you guys tell me a little bit more about yourselves? Charlie, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Nice to be here, both of you. Thanks for inviting us. Yes, I'm Charlie. I am the VP of Marketing Communications at Volt. I've been there for nearly 3.5 years now. Joined as content lead. I guess I kind of came in to humanize the product capabilities and the value proposition, and to turn Volt into something a little bit more understandable and relatable, and really, I guess, then kind of entrench the content and brand disciplines into Volt's way of working. And yeah, 3.5 years later, we're just about to launch a slightly revised brand. We're now recognized, I hope, as a kind of global leader in real-time payments. And I can say hand on heart that content and brand have been pretty important in establishing Volt's reputation in the market, and look forward to talking.
Ben, tell us about yourself. How'd you get here?
Hey guys, yeah. So Volt I've actually only been with for, I think, just coming up to 6 months in Jan. I've come in to kind of head up and lead the product marketing efforts at the company. So this is the first time that really product marketing has had a proper place in the business. And whilst obviously Charlie's been there for a few years now and has kind of been through those growth periods, I've kind of coming in at a really nice place because we've already secured all those nice accolades and those placement pieces that Charlie works hard on, and we get across some really outstanding press. So it's a fantastic time for me to join, and also just really kind of help bring a little bit more structure and process around how we build our products, how we understand the market, the context of the market.
Before we dig into this conversation, could you guys give us a little bit of an overview of the space that you're operating in? Because I think, I'm not sure the extent to which our listeners are familiar with Pay by Bank, if they've actually used it before. So I think it would be nice to get a sense of what does this market look like?
And what is real-time payments? I thought all payments happened in real time. Apparently they do not. So
Open banking and real-time payments are two terms that are used interchangeably, but actually mean different things. And real-time payments is almost kind of a discipline in its own right that doesn't actually kind of pertain to our end product that a consumer would use, which, Sasha, you alluded to. It's pay by bank. It's the ability to use your bank account as a payment instrument. A customer would select pay by bank at checkout when they're buying something online. They would then select who they bank with. They're then redirected to their banking app where that payment is essentially pre-populated and ready to approve. So you're bypassing a debit card, which is a conduit to that bank account in that process. So essentially one interoperable standard, which essentially permits a licensed regulated third party like Volt to initiate a service from a customer's bank account. In our case, that's obviously payments.
Okay, so if I'm thinking about your audience, it's correct to say, your job as content and product marketing is to convince merchants to have Vault as one of the payment options. So they're kind of one audience. And then you have the end user who has multiple payment options when they check out, probably, and you want them to choose this option, right? This is kind of like your business goal.
Exactly. Yeah. So we are. I mean, this is an interesting kind of almost a cultural point. We're a B2B organization, in that we sell our solutions to other businesses. But actually, for us to generate revenue, we rely on those end users. So really, we're B2B2C.
Yeah.
We're talking about financial services. We're talking about payments. So we have a duty of care to those end users to kind of show and reassure them that we are safe to use, easy to use, and also we're better than alternatives.
But the big task, obviously, we have is we're only ever speaking to the merchants, really. So it's a case of us trying to educate the merchant in best practice to then further educate the end user when they are at that point of payment. And then, of course, more broadly, we have a few channels and opportunities where we can kind of directly speak to that end user, whether it is kind of across press opportunities or across materials that we can put out across LinkedIn, etc. But yeah, it is an interesting battle and opportunity, because we're trying to educate someone that's constantly at arm's length to us.
Yeah, I'm kind of blown away by how challenging that is. As someone who works more B2C, and now we're in the enterprise space, part of what, most of our positioning efforts are about, um, is making sure that the people who end up influencing our revenue understand the problem we're solving for them. But I jumped the gun a little bit. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Charlie, because you mentioned you've been at Vault for a couple years now, 3 years, and you started off as, the head of a two-man show for your brand team. And you even were able to convince Series A company that content marketing was the way to go, which I'm very curious about how you got leadership to do that. But now, you have been on board, and I'm really curious to understand from both of you what that evolution has been like. Like, how did you see the signs, right, that it was time to start bringing more of that product marketing expertise in, and what it's been like for you to execute it?
I can probably tell the story up until Ben came on board and the need for Ben.
That's what's interesting here. I mean, Charlie, right? Like you had content and brand and product marketing all under you until Ben came along. So that, I mean, that transition is really fascinating to us. And also you went from, speaking the language of investors to now really understanding your partners, your end users, those customers. So we're very curious, what that evolution looked like, from both a positioning standpoint and also, internally, and the sort of internal layout of those responsibilities.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, back in kind of 2019, Vault had this idea for a product that was very quickly turned into an actual real product by 2020, when we were all kind of locked down and wondering what to do. We had this kind of incredible product that we made real, which is essentially unifying this pay by bank experience for merchants globally. Investors were quick to buy into the product, and I guess it's worth flagging, we've always been kind of tech first. It's a bit of a cliche, but we're almost like the opposite of Klarna, should I say that out loud? So we're very much kind of brand first, playing back their kind of end user lifestyles on London Underground adverts. We've never really done that. We've concentrated on the product. And investors were quick to kind of recognize the value of what we were building, and it didn't take the company long to get a very decent Series A fundraise in June 2021, which at the time was actually a record-breaking amount for the open banking industry. So you can tell it was kind of, we were onto something. About 3 or 4 weeks after that, I got enticed to join Vault, and inherited a brand that was lagging far behind its product capabilities. I think our tagline at the time was "Bank Direct Payments Unified," which doesn't really mean a whole lot. And the kind of brand look and feel was quite monochromatic, quite techy, and turn that into something a bit more tangible and relatable in terms of how the brand spoke, its look and feel, its value proposition. So yeah, that was really kind of what I came on board to do, and work quite closely with our founding team initially, and that really helped kind of get the buy-in for the brand marketing and the content marketing. I'm a big believer in brand recall. If someone says open banking, from a kind of brand perspective or real-time payments, we want Vault to be that brand that pops into your head and not one of our competitors. And this is now me grabbing hold of the baton, but we're also releasing products a lot during this kind of 2-3 year period in terms of value add products, also kind of new expansions into new markets. And I was trying to oversee that, but I think as early as kind of early 2022, we were kind of pitching for someone to come in and look after our product marketing efforts, because it was slightly outside of my skill set and also probably too much to do. And then, thank goodness, we brought Ben on board 6 months ago.
Gotcha. Seamless. We didn't even practice this, I swear. So, I mean, listen, when I kind of came in, we've all heard that move fast and break things kind of phrase constantly in tech, and it works really well up to a certain point. And then, of course, as the business grows and the natural systems and processes that had formed from a small business begin to falter somewhat as you grow and expand into new markets. And we had product teams who were building bespoke answers to kind of merchant problems, which are fantastic for those specific merchant. But we needed to kind of start looking at how we can then broaden the scope of those products across the markets and make sure that as we are building to the context of the broader market that we're in. So that was kind of really where my main focus was when I started, is understanding, what are the products that we currently have in the market, what does Vault look like and want to be right now, but really importantly, kind of where are we going? Like, what's the future of Vault, and kind of are we looking to move out of that payment side and maybe into more of a money management side of things, and start to grow with not only the market but the existing merchants as well. In terms of that kind of journey from investor through to kind of consumer or merchant focus, it's one thing saying kind of global interoperability via single endpoint, but that means nothing to somebody in the market. So it's really kind of taking the company on that journey and understand what we need to evolve, and sometimes making the tough decisions around what we need to let go, because some things may have been built that worked perfectly to entice a valuable merchant in, but if they don't have the broader adoption in the market, then you need to make those tough calls.
Can you say a little bit more about the things you're cutting? Because I think, marketers, no matter the specific discipline, I think when we're successful or when we fail, it's almost based more on the things we choose not to do, because the list of things you could do is so endless. And so I love it when someone is brave enough to say, like, listen, you can't do that all. Like, we got to choose one, and this is not it.
And a very big decision that was made, which I think is now completely public. I think this was all released. But when I first started, I mean, I joined from 3.5 years in the crypto world. So I was very well entrenched in that mad part of tech. And upon joining, there was a lot of talk around Vault exploring crypto, exploring blockchain, and building a solution around a very, very exciting growing facet of the broader tech, but also financial tech industry. So there was a small team that began to work on some really interesting ideas. And Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was named VX2 at the time. And they're the kind of things that we really had to kind of put our heads together and decide, like, right, is there the bandwidth for us right now to continue with what we are building, what we have built, but then also introduce an entirely new kind of concept to the business, an entirely new infrastructure around technology that is evolving at such a rapid rate in terms of use cases, the legal landscape, the compliance landscape. It's super fast paced. Do we have that bandwidth? And after a lot of conversations, the decision was made to kind of split those two out, for Vault to continue in its current trajectory, and VX2 to begin to be built as an almost separate but still interconnected entity. So it's those kind of big calls that have had to be made.
Was there also a recognition, like in this sort of evolution of understanding that you need someone who is dedicated to product marketing, that you have this this end user who has their own emotional journey when it comes to payments, and we really need to understand that audience, that stakeholder?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's always the emotional component, but um, first of all, you've got to look at the more kind of like global landscapes. There is very kind of country and geography specific habits with money, even down to kind of like what people use for payments. So debit, credit, or as we see in Brazil, with like 75% of the population now is using Pix on a day-to-day basis. So that's a massive difference. But really, it's more habitual because naturally, people certainly across Europe, we find that if it ain't broke kind of thing, then people will just stick to what they know. So debit credit cards now, with the advent of Apple Pay and Google Pay, that is the natural thing for people to use. So bringing product marketing in, it was kind of understanding that broader landscape, but then trying to get into the nitty gritty of consumer behavior at that point of payment per kind of country, in effect, because it will differ, and then that will then influence how we work, how I work with Charlie on, for example, the checkout branding. What we will provide as best practice will differ per country because there's different banks that are more popular. So that little emotional touch of seeing your bank that you've banked with since you were 13 years old and seeing their logo, that is going to make a massive difference rather than seeing maybe the Vault logo or a generic bank brand that you don't actually have that emotional familiar connection with. So it's understanding those nuances and then putting them into practice with the materials that we supply to those merchants. That's how we kind of gradually begin to influence that end user through suggestions and working with them and holding their hand throughout the onboarding process, because we know what works.
Just to add a little bit on that, I think the consumer point is so interesting because, well, I used to attend quite a few, still do kind of open banking payments events. And when there is a merchant sharing a stage with someone who's providing a service, they always burst the bubble that people like paying. Like, no one likes paying for stuff, really. It's like everyone wants stuff for free, ideally. No one wants to pay for anything. And that payment process is not particularly enjoyable, and it's not set up to be enjoyable. But it should be super secure and it should be super fast. That's really all people care about. And that takes time to build that trust, and people have to actually get to that certain point of trust by which they can then make an initial payment, and then hopefully they recognize that it's easy and friction free, and they'll come back and make a repeat purchase. I guess like the only counterpoint to that argument, and this is me kind of semi disagreeing with myself, is to use that Klarna example again, because they have played their kind of ICP from a consumer perspective, lifestyles back to them from that kind of point of aspiration, you know, like really cool, good looking people in like really nice clothes. And they basically said, Klarna gives you access to all of these things because you buy now and you pay later. You can get all of these things. You can be the best version of yourself through a payment method, which is a pretty bold move considering their debt, right? They're kind of aspirationalizing debt as a product.
It's risky. It's very risky.
It's risky, yeah, but they've
really bite them back if it doesn't work out.
they pulled it off massively.
So then my question is, both today and hopefully in the future when the adoption of the solution is much broader, like what are you doing to make that first time customer acquisition smoother, more efficient for you, which is, I think, a universal question for any marketer, right? Like, once you try my product, I know you'll love it. So like, please buy it, right? Buy it once and then you'll see how great it is.
Yeah, I think so. Our checkout is being kind of constantly iterated. A good example is we used to have the option, like a little toggle option, to remember your bank. So the next time you check out with Vault, you wouldn't have to select your bank, even though that process is very easy. It would remember you if you choose this option. We've now removed that. Why would you not choose to have your bank remembered? So that just makes it much easier. And then we also realized that people recognize their banking app logos more than the bank logo itself. So we've
Interesting.
often they're the same, but or very, very similar. Maybe like a 10% tweak and a slightly different shape. But
they're like already on some digital platform. So like that's the
exactly, yeah. It's just that kind of instinctive recognition. And if you instinctively recognize your banking app logo as opposed to the logo that hangs over, say, there aren't many bank branches left anymore, but that logo that appears over the door is slightly different. So that kind of instant kind of recognition. That also builds a bit of trust because you know that you're going to be within your banking environment, which you're in every day if you're on your phone. So yeah, that's kind of how we do it, to kind of constantly drive adoption. We're also looking at kind of revised terminology as well. So pay by bank is pretty well recognized in the UK. In like a direct translation in Germany would have a slightly different kind of end user perception in terms of it basically being paying your utilities. So we use a translation of instant bank transfer in Germany because that's more kind of related to an e-commerce payment. So I guess it's that consumer understanding. We have to know what they're looking for and what they respond to, and that's kind of constantly evolving.
So how do you think about, I mean, you guys are in what sounds to me like a really noisy environment. You have, regulatory environments that are at different levels of maturity. You have consumers that are at different levels of adoption in terms of, like, broadly speaking, this technology. You have a ton of, new market entrants. You have some of the big, like, credit card payment incumbents now entering the space as well. How do you, like, given all of this noise, how do you think about differentiating yourselves?
Well, I'll dive in.
It's a big question.
I think what gives us
I take it by the pause that it's it's a tough
It's a
one.
tough one.
I think so. What we've built essentially is a global real-time payments network for merchants to plug into, and then from that single integration, they get access to all of the different markets that we're live in, and they can offer all of their consumers in all of those markets essentially the same pay by bank experience. No one else does that to the level that Volt does at the moment, and in order to do that, we utilize quite a few different things in terms of how we connect to banks. So we have multiple connections into multiple banks in multiple markets. I'll have to check if we can say this, but we rely on connectivity providers in some markets to ensure we have those strongest connections. A lot of our competitors build their own connections to banks, which is great, but those bank APIs that they build into are of varying quality. So you can have as strong connection as you like, but if you don't have the kind of guarantee of resilience at the bank's end, it's still not going to work. So we've gone with the multiple connections via third parties route than strictly having our own connections, which we have as well. So from that infrastructure point of view, that's allowed us to scale pretty quickly because we're not kind of beholden to our own connections. And then we've just really doubled down on, I guess, kind of optimizing our checkout, testing in different markets. I guess we appeal to enterprise merchants who have that presence in different markets. So once you have a few of those on board and you optimize all of those payment journeys in all of those markets, you know that you're onto something. And not many of our competitors are able to do that because they don't have the geographic reach and the product depth. I was, Ben, going to talk about the kind of value add products, but I'm very much now going into your world. So this is always going to be a 50-50 answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that this is probably going to go out in January. So we'll have to double check whether I'm kind of pivoting anything to the post here. But there's still the payment side of things, and that's kind of like Volt's bread and butter. But there are plans next year, which already exists in the market, but plans to kind of do our grander launch and our bigger push around our Vault accounts proposition. So there's a lot more to come there that will begin to differentiate us from the players in the market that we've always been associated with and put up against, because those capabilities will remain for all of our merchants, that bread and butter. But we are looking to the future, and I always like to use the phrase consultative sales, and really working with our merchants, really understanding, like, this is where we are now, you and us, but where are you going in the future that we can meet you at? Because these are our plans. And that's the new approach we're taking to kind of like any prospects that we have, any existing clients that we have, is really trying to look at what does the future hold for your business, and are we building something that can support you in those efforts in the future?
Charlie, just to reflect back something that you said earlier in our time together, you mentioned that Volt is a technology first company. And I really hear that reflected in the way that you even answered that question. Like, you are so clearly technology first in how you think about your positioning as opposed to brand first.
I think it's It's an interesting one because I'm not a techie person. That's not my background, but
I don't know. I heard you mention some real techie things.
It's ingrained in us at this point.
yeah, I know.
It gives you a lot to work with as a marketer, right? Like,
well, this is going to be my point, right? It's kind of getting excited by all of these granular components in terms of our capabilities. But you touched on earlier, kind of the regulatory environments, what's kind of permissible, not only from a product build perspective, but from a marketing kind of comms perspective. What can we say in the interest of helping our merchants and their end users, because there are kind of certain parameters we operate in there. But I think as a good kind of content marketer or a good brand marketer, being able to kind of be kind of exposed to all of this information and then to interpret it and articulate it in the right way to the right audiences at the right time is where it's so important. I fear I may have lost some of your listeners by some of my explanations at the top of this episode, and that's because I'm not perfect yet. My writing's way better than my speaking, by the way.
you're doing great.
So we don't have your sales team in the room, but that's kind of like the third musketeer, right, of this trio when it comes to brand product marketing. And then there's this other team that
Sure.
very much affects how your brand is perceived, how your product is literally sold, how it's positioned, and I don't know how your meetings work, but you're probably not in the room. You probably give them collateral and support to help them with the messaging. But I'm curious what that relationship is like, how you make sure that you are aligned and that you get also the feedback that from the conversations kind of they're having on the ground.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, going back to Charlie's point about being tech first, there's the three people in the room, which is the product side, the sales side, and then the marketing side. And that really is the kind of the context of my role at any business I work at from a product marketing perspective, is that vehicle of information and to a degree translation between those three functions and making sure that communication is consistent across those. So I actually work very, very closely with the sales team. we just came back off of a kind of a 3-day sales kickoff thing last week, which was very good fun and very informative. But the way we tend to look at it at Volt is we naturally understand that our solutions will work differently depending on the vertical that we are selling to. So going back to that kind of broader context of a market, it isn't just one size fits all even there in that approach. We do kind of look down into the details around how does the Volt solution work for e-commerce and how does it work for crypto. Now, they are two very different languages that we need to speak. And of course, our sales reps, they know that language perfectly. So it's important for me to work with them to talk them through what products are coming up, what's already in the market, and working with them to understand those specific verticals problems and then see if we can fit those solutions. And then importantly, coming back to my work with Charlie, once we have that understanding of that jigsaw of like, right, this piece fits that problem, how do we then communicate that using the language that makes sense to their vertical? So crypto is a perfect example because that community is so strong and so communicative. There we go. That they have created their own terminology for so many things. And the only way that you can possibly begin to sell into that particular vertical, into that community, is by speaking their language. So we have to sit down and effectively, translate. We speak about these products in this way when we are looking at kind of wealth tech or travel or something like that. But we now need to sit down with those sales teams and literally translate all of that into the terminology that is used by that community because it's so entrenched in that vernacular. So yeah, it's really interesting. That's one of the more interesting things that I enjoy about the role because I do get to work with those three functions and do alongside that get to learn several different languages of all of our different verticals we're trying to sell to. So yeah, we do quite well. But can always be improved. And yeah, we're putting a lot more kind of feedback loops from the sales team in as of next year to make sure that the feedback we're getting from those teams is actually implemented into the roadmap so that we are building and iterating for a purpose. And it's not just siloed approaches to the job.
So that's your alignment with sales, but what about your inter-alignment here? How do you make sure that the marketing comms and the product marketing are aligned? Like, and what do you think are like best practices for that for a startup at your stage?
Speaking really like candidly, we're still we know what we need to do. It's almost kind of a question of ownership at the moment, and we are in a phase now when we've kind of come out of this slightly kind of scrappier way of working to having all the right people. But I think some people outside of the marketing function, and Ben will know kind of which parts I'm talking about, move at slightly different speeds, and also there's the kind of added complication, I suppose, of who's shouting loudest from kind of higher for what reason. So having like the core thing for how Ben and I work with our commercial teams and our kind of product build teams is kind of objectivity. Like, we're doing everything for the right reasons at the right time in the interest of the business. And then I think all the processes now are kind of falling into place really well. I think it's a sign probably of how kind of professional we've become. And also, like, it's almost like there's a list of things we need to tick off, isn't there, in terms of like product naming conventions. We've got this kind of electricity theme, but does that make sense to continue if we're launching something where we're essentially like shoehorning an electric name onto something? Does that kind of affect kind of product tangibility? So yeah, and then is using this name in this market going to be confusing? And then is that something that our compliance or legal team are likely to flag? Because the kind of customer understanding of this term actually pertains to something else, even though technically, arguably, it's accurate. So these are the things now I guess, I think from my perspective, but hopefully from Ben's perspective, it's been a learning kind of the last 6 months. Now we've got someone of your expertise in and your kind of ways of working. I think it's been a welcome kick up the backside for Volt and its processes in terms of, look, this is how we do things properly. These are all the people we need to get together. And this is how we kind of remain objective to launch a product that the sales team can kind of pick up and run with. Basically, I have to check less stuff now, which is great.
That's great.
I get the information and I don't have to check it anymore. It's like, we've all done this.
We understood it's been good for you, Charlie.
Yeah.
It should be arriving in the right format by the time I bring it to him. There's just to add to that, there's obviously the benefit of being in the same team. Mm-hmm. And product marketing sits within the marketing function. And this is something for anyone listening that has worked with product marketing or is a product marketer. It's a massive point of contention within the product marketing community, our little community, about whether product marketing sits under product or whether it sits under marketing, and what the benefits and drawbacks are of both. And I've done both. I've even been in companies where I have requested to move my team to a different kind of like lead or function because it wasn't working for that specific business. Now at Volt, it works very nicely being in the marketing side because of the setup that we have at the business. So that does help Charlie and I with communication, because as the information comes through twice a week, he's there opposite me. So I can just say, hey, there's some updates coming. Let's hold fire on X, Y, Z, because I think we might need to change the naming conventions, as Charlie pointed to. In another world, I could be sat in the product function, possibly in another country, and it doesn't quite have that instantaneous communication that we're very, very fortunate to have. So that has been a big part of speeding the process up. And I think just kind of the broader desire for a little bit more structure around some things. It's always tough to implement, but once it's in, people are like, this makes sense.
So having done it differently at different companies that you've been at, would you say that has more to do, whether it's under the product function or the marketing function, that has more to do with like the business itself, the stage that the business is in? Like what advice would you give?
Yeah, no, such a good question. I think there's two things which are kind of interlinked. It's the stage of the business. I can only speak from like a tech side, but it's the stage of the business which typically then influences whether the business is product first, or they are kind of thinking more broadly by that stage. So the later the stage, the more broadly the company needs to begin to think in terms of kind of market context, competitors and everything. The earlier the stage is that very, very product heavy, like let's just build, release. when it's that earlier stage, I actually would argue it's more beneficial for a product marketer or team to be on the product side, because they can earlier begin to introduce that structure and they can get people used to that way of working, that process, everything down to kind of being in the room when a product is ideated and you're kind of thinking about the concept. That product marketer, if they're there at that point and sat in product, they're already thinking several stages ahead. They're planning the release, they're planning X, Y, Z. If they're not, typically what happens, which is the bane of my life, is you get somebody pinging you on Slack or any other comms channel saying, hey, we've just launched this product, which can sometimes be a huge thing. It's in the market. No one's using it. Why? Make it work. And you're having to be like, wait, what? And you have to kind of go back to the drawing board. And yeah,
Who's it for?
it's chaos. And you have to kind of unpick,
Who
like,
do
why
they
was it
need
built?
it?
Whose idea was this? Well, exactly. It can be very, very frustrating. So I'm very, very fortunate that at Volt, they have recognized that ahead of time. And we've got the right kind of like places for everyone.
So I didn't start out in product marketing, but I did product marketing at Wix for a long time. And now I manage like a broader marketing team that includes brand, et cetera. And what you said really resonated with me, because when Wix now is a platform with many, many, many products. And in situations where we put product marketing to sit with product, it gets so siloed that, like you said, we're unable to position properly, because that product, including product marketer or team, can only see.
It's in an echo chamber of their own. Yeah.
And then you pull it out and you're like, but like over here, we're building like very similar thing. Maybe not even the same, maybe it's adjacent, but like you need to talk about it when it sits under one brand as a whole rather than as a standalone. So preaching to the choir. I've been there.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
One day.
Will we? I don't know. But I hope.
Looking to the future, I know that we haven't talked too much about this, but there are some major credit card payment incumbents that are coming into the space. I'm curious, is that like terrifying for you guys? Is that, or is it actually great because there's this sort of economies of scale that happens, and like a recognition and a recognition of this as a service among consumers? Like, how do you see that going forward? Good or bad?
Yeah, probably a mix of both, but hopefully good broadly. So I think the MasterCard, Visa, and Amex all kind of either fairly late to the party, or they've been fairly secretive about their operations. Maybe MasterCard is the exception there. Visa have got some really big plans for their kind of account-to-account offering for next year. I've got a few kind of predictions and thoughts on kind of why they've waited so long, and I think it might be something to do with VRPs. They obviously want to go to where the money is. They want to have a commercially viable account-to-account product. Amex is one, by the way. It's fantastic. Have you ever used Just Giving in the UK to make a charity payment?
I do it all the time. My kids' school.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, theirs is probably among the best I've seen, but they've been relatively quiet about it. But why would they want to cannibalize their cards revenue? That's the kind of big question for me. So how are they going to make it commercially viable? So I think they have to have very specific use cases that won't cannibalize their kind of very impressive revenues already. I think these are probably, so I think MasterCard are kind of, from what I understand anyway, they're exploring the tech a little bit more from an open perspective. They're positioning themselves as an ally of the banks and of merchants, in that we're a part of this. We're building this cool tech. We're doing demos, and you can kind of come and see how it works. Visa are like, you're not going to know anything that we're doing, but when we are going to launch, it's going to be big. And Amex are just kind of quietly going about their business. So it's interesting. You've got three almost kind of completely different approaches, because they're all trying to work out how best to capitalize on the account-to-account market, which is massive in monetary terms. I'll have to kind of dig out a figure for you, but it is a kind of a real kind of global phenomenon. adoption has been huge over the last 4 or 5 years. So obviously they're going to get involved at some point. I do like, though, the kind of spirit of collaboration, especially kind of, MasterCard's approach is being kind of, we're all in this together. That can only be a good thing in terms of driving adoption and recognition. So I'm broadly positive, and I think other players, it's probably kind of predictable what they're going to do and when they're going to do it.
Got it. Yeah, it makes sense when you've got a really big pie.
It's a big old pie. Yeah.
A big pie. Yeah. What are you guys most excited about in terms of the future of Volt?
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, we've got some very exciting product plans for the new year. For me personally, but although adjacent with my work with Charlie as well, is the rollout of those.
Completely agree with that. I guess kind of as an add-on to that is having a much more kind of verticalized way of speaking from a Marcom's perspective. We've got our universal value prop that's going to be kind of rolled out with a new website. Watch this space for that. But then from that, we finally got this kind of really good foundational pillar from which to speak to our target verticals in a much more kind of tangible way. And a lot of research has gone into that. So I think, resonating more with our ICPs. We know what our kind of primary use cases are. It's either, buying something, paying for something, a good that you receive in the post, or it is topping something up, like an investment wallet is one of those two things. But really doubling down on that and how that's played out as well in terms of the look and feel of that UI imagery, use cases, testimonials. We're at a tipping point now in kind of rolling these out, and 2025 will be the time when we do that.
Thank you, guys. Before we let you go, a couple questions that we ask all of our guests. Who do you follow? What are you reading? And what are you listening to? What's keeping you informed as a marketer? What's inspiring you?
On the follow side, so I'm going to mess his name up, and apologies if he ever hears this, but I think it's Marcel and Oost, LinkedIn, but I mean, he's all things payments across the entire kind of landscape. He very, very apt at kind of collecting, consolidating really important information, very stats heavy. So definitely give him a follow on LinkedIn. And then also Product Marketing Alliance, big shout out there, because that is a place where we have those conversations and air our gripes that are related to that specific function. But loads of really, really good resources there from PMA. In terms of reading, it's probably a bit of a cliched one, but Jeffrey Moore, no relation, Crossing the Chasm is just an awesome book for anyone from B2C to B2B. And then I think April Dunford, obviously awesome, I think is what it's called. Just a Bible for kind of market positioning. Listening, I'm afraid I use my listening for my nerdy podcasts outside of work. So
that's totally legitimate.
So just kind of anything science-based. The more detailed studies around kind of the brain and science as you can get, in both a easily digestible format, like a show called Armchair Expert. They have a Thursday segment called Experts on Experts, which is really entertaining. And then to the other end of the spectrum with much more nerdy kind of breakdowns. But they're my top ones.
Look, there's certainly a connection there, when you start getting into the like behavioral economics of marketing. So it's not
exactly, always thinking about the brain in some way.
And Charlie, what about you?
So read and follow, or follow and read. I'm probably going to cheat and give the same answer, but hopefully for a valid reason. So there's a guy called David Hyatt, who actually runs a denim company called Hyatt Jeans. But he has kind of an agency background. He's actually got a really interesting background, kind of pre-agency. His LinkedIn posts are he's probably the only kind of LinkedIn author who can stop me in my tracks whenever I see a post from David Hyatt. His takes on kind of content and brand in what is very kind of noisy in terms of an online environment, and something that I'm actually quite often reluctant to contribute to myself for that very reason. But what he says is of value, 100% of the time. And and in addition to that, really gets you to think. One of his books, little segue, is called Do Open, and it's about email marketing. And, to any kind of email marketing naysayers or anyone who questions the validity of email marketing, and I was in that bracket.
I am there.
Yeah. So this book,
I'm like writing this down. I'm like, maybe I missed
this book will change.
You have to let us know.
It is one of the most well-written marketing books I've ever read. And his kind of powers of persuasion, and that makes him sound a bit like a cult leader. He is not that. He's the most kind of normal.
You know what? That would make him such a good marketer. That sneaks in.
He's a cult leader.
Do Open is just such a great book in terms of like what the value of email as a marketing channel and how it should make recipients feel, but also kind of the benchmark being a good email is one that you look forward to getting. It's like, yeah, and how you get there, it's brilliant. So David Hyatt, big kind of recommendation there for anyone listening. Follow his LinkedIn, buy his books. I've never met him. I don't get any commissions.
We'll let him know that you should. Affiliate marketing right here.
Probably should. I'll send him a message after this. Well, David, if you're listening, drop me an email or find me on LinkedIn. I'm going to also give a similar answer to Ben in terms of listening. So podcasts are my sanctuary. 14,500 minutes listened, thanks to Spotify Wrapped for that cool stat in 2024. But there is a parallel, and I'm sorry if this is a bit cringy, it might be, but there's a podcast called Empire with
hello, yes, I listen.
Yeah.
Oh, you told me about this.
I'm like a history geek, so
amazing.
that's where I tend to lose myself in the history.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, well, if you're familiar with it, then you know already. If you're not, you will love it. It's says William Dalrymple, who's kind of specialism is kind of, I guess, India from like the early kind of Mughal empires of the 14 and 1500s. The way that and there is a co-host, Anita Anand, who's a journalist, but the way William Dalrymple, this is the parallel with my job, kind of in a way. The way that the data that he's exposed to and the depth of kind of raw historical data to turn that into a compelling story, and his books are kind of historical books of events, but he structures them like a novel. They're not fictionalized, they're factual, but they're structured like a novel, and that is kind of reflected in his podcast, his ability to turn kind of old ancient manuscripts that have been translated from Sanskrit into a story for kind of anyone who's interested to
that sounds so cool.
It is incredible. It really is. He's great. So Empire by William Dalrymple and Anita Anand is what I'm listening to kind of religiously at the moment. A great series on the American Civil War and the War of Independence as well, which is really, really interesting. So highly recommend that.
I love that comparison of the historian to the marketer and having to take vast amounts of data and cross a story out of it. Fantastic.
I think there's a parallel, but it sounded a bit cringy. But I think
not at all. That's great.
Data and narrative. That's marketing, and so it's behavioral science. So.
Exactly.
So at least we're listening to the right things.
We're making it work.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Charlie and Ben. This has been a fantastic conversation. That is it for this episode of Funnel Vision. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms, and we'll be posting the full interview on YouTube under the Wix Studio page. Be sure to hit subscribe to stay up to date on our latest episode. You can also find more great resources for marketers at our Content Hub linked below and in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Funnel Vision.